Over the previous chapters, and for us the previous weeks, we've discussed the case that Paul is building. He began by undermining the Galatian belief that in order to be in right standing with God, in order to gain embrace in God's family and God's kingdom, that one must follow the law, the Old Testament rules and regulations governing the people of Israel. Paul erodes that belief by pointing out that, first off, A, no one could actually do that, and B, Jesus is the only one who did, and C, faith in Jesus is what matters, thereby freeing us from the obligations to follow the law for our salvation. This is why in verse 18 of chapter 5, he says, you are not under the law. We're no longer under the law because we are under Christ. We are covered by Jesus. That's what it means to be under Christ. However, Paul also addresses the converse of this newfound freedom that faith deploys. He addresses those who would use the freedom from the law that Jesus offers and then use it for selfishness or self-indulgence, as we learned last week. This is why Paul, again, he says in 5:13, when he is making his case, he says, you, my brothers and sisters, you were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh or self-indulgence. The alternative that's being sort of put forward by Paul to the ancient church in Galatia and to the contemporary church in the District of Columbia is not life in the law, and neither is it life in the flesh, but rather it's this third alternative. It's life in the Spirit. Walk by the Spirit, it says in verse 16. You are led by the Spirit in verse 18. What Paul's trying to highlight here is what Jesus so often explained in the Gospels. That life with Christ, it's not just like the opposite of something else. It's an altogether different thing. The kingdom of God is this altogether different category. It's just on its own. It isn't just a better version of a bad thing or a nicer variation of a broken experience. It has an altogether different kind. If the law is like one side of the coin and self-indulgence is the other side, Paul is saying, no, it's neither of those. It's life in the Spirit of God. It's the Spirit of God in you. That's where freedom is found. That's what you are to walk by. That's what you're led by. Church, I gotta say, if I just sort of be frank for a minute, I think here's the rub for me, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I think it's for many of us. I fear that we continue to remain captivated by visions of God's kingdom that are simply better alternatives to what we know. We imagine life with God as just a really good version of the life that we have now. It's like our life without problems. And what if God is wanting to say to us, no, life with me is an altogether different category of living. It's not the other side of the same coin. It's a different type of currency altogether. What if the Spirit is trying to speak to us through our brother Paul in this letter, and he's saying your imaginations for your lives are way too small. It's too captivated by what you know. I pray that we experience a truer freedom, a freedom of our imaginations, and consider the beautiful and thrilling and exhilarating and fascinating, if not a bit nerve-wracking life that the Spirit is calling us into. A life that isn't defined just by the parameters of what the world denotes as good or blessed or hallowed, but rather is propelled by the power and fire of the one who made the cosmos, yet knows the number of hairs on our head. The one that moves mountains and tells the rivers which way to go, but hears your prayers in the quiet of the nighttime hours when you cry out to the Lord, Lord, here I am, do you see me? God, I pray that you would capture our imaginations. Capture our imaginations for our lives so that we might walk by the Spirit and be led by your Spirit, that same Spirit that hovered over the deep and the dark at the creation of the world and now hovers over our lives, beckoning us to come unto you and to walk in the ways of your life in us. Paul exhorts the church to walk by the Spirit, to be led by the Spirit, for that is what it is to walk in freedom. Freedom is walking in a liberating step with the Spirit of God.